Thank you very much for staying with us. This is still Politics Tonight, digging beyond the headlines. And on the program tonight, we're discussing the federal government's decision to halt subsidy removal and target non-oil revenue with Dr. Muda Yusuf, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. So, Dr. Yusuf, now, the president-elect has promised to remove subsidy upon inauguration. Do you see him changing his mind?
No, you see, it is because we also need to be politically strategic. The president-elect is a very democratic person. He believes in consultation. And I believe that after going through all of that, it may not be strategic to, from day one, completely remove the subsidy. Okay. Because the shock on the citizens will be too much. That was why I was talking about enablers. We need to create soft landing, even for the citizens, because times are extremely hard. And we also need to situate this within the current political context. You know what the election was, all the issues and all of that. So, if you take all that into consideration, a matter like this requires very good consultation and stakeholder engagement. I'm not sure whether that has started to happen, but it is good for those things to precede whatever decision has to be taken. That is one. Secondly, because the oil price is still very high, still hovering between 80, 90, 100, it is much more difficult to remove everything at a go. If the oil price was around 50 or less, it will be much easier to deal with. But because it's at the level at which it is, it will be very difficult to remove everything. So I believe that first, there should be a strategy to do it in phases. Okay. And as we do that, we also put in place palliatives. Not palliatives in the sense of handing over money to people, but palliatives in terms of bringing down the cost of living. We have to examine the variables driving inflation. Which of those variables are quick wins that you can, deal with to bring down the cost of living? We need to engage those who are in agriculture. Already, the current government is doing a bit of that. But the incoming administration can do a lot more. What are the impediments to agricultural production? What are the impediments to mechanization? What are the impediments to the use of technology in agriculture? We are using tech everywhere, but we are not seeing much of tech in agriculture. Because if we see more of technology in agriculture, you see more younger generation. Because the energy of Nigeria today lies in the youths. And we can unleash it in agriculture if only we make the space more tech-driven. That is what is happening in many other parts of the world. So if you look at all the issues around agricultural production, agri-processing, we talk to those people who are producing staple foods. I've seen the Bakers Association come here to complain bitterly several times about the challenges they are facing with the cost of bread, particularly the inputs that they use in the production of bread. Bread is a staple food. What concessions can we give the players in that ecosystem to bring down the cost of bread? These are the things that the common people want to see.
All right. Dr. Yusuf, I'm sure you know organized labor has continued to discourage subsidy removal. So how do we achieve unanimity on this issue?
Well, we cannot have too much of consultation. And just as I said, we need to put enablers on the table. We don't just call labor and say that we are removing subsidy. What are we putting together to complement the removal of subsidy? and to cushion the effects. And there must be timeline for these things. So that kind of engagement must happen. And Labour must also realize that depending on a government-run refinery to provide petroleum product for this country is not sustainable. Because they kept saying that we should make refineries to work. The refineries, the way they are today, are big liabilities to the economy. They are drain pipes. Rather than being an asset, they are a big liability. I'm sure Labour doesn't want to saddle the new administration with a bundle of liabilities. And not just the administration, all of us as citizens.
Nigerians.
You don't want a platform which is just a patronage platform. We have spent how much for turnaround maintenance? Billions of dollars over the last 10 years. And yet these refineries have not worked. And yes, we are still insisting that unless they work, we cannot deal with this important reform. So I believe that Labour needs to have a rethink on that. We should have, just as I said, first, we should have a competitive framework, even under the current importation regime. Let there be competition. Let us liberalize the foreign exchange market so that you don't need to go and be begging anybody to get foreign exchange. You don't need to go and be queuing the CBN to get foreign exchange. Once you have your documents, you should be able to access the foreign exchange. Again, that will require reforming the foreign exchange market itself. That's another big issue that we need to deal with. So once you have competition in that space, the second phase is to ensure that we encourage more people to invest in refineries. You have to waive all the duties on equipment for those who are interested. Let us waive it. Waive all the taxes. Give them tax holidays. And we have to do more to encourage people to even move away from the use of petroleum products.
All right.
Let us use more gas for our generators. Let us use more gas for our vehicles. All these trucks and all, they can convert them to compress natural gas.
All right, Dr. Yusuf. Now, because President-elect Bola Tinubu has made it clear that improving the living conditions of Nigerians is one of his major priorities.
Yeah.
So what measures can be put in place, to ensure that the removal of fuel subsidy does not worsen inflation and economic instability?
Well, it's to look at what are the things that the common people consume. What are the things they spend their money on? Almost 70 to 80% is on food. Maybe another 30% is on transportation. Of course, you have other things that school fees and the rest of them. So let us look at what can bring down the cost of food. And we cannot do that without engaging those who are in agriculture. And we look at the entire agricultural value chain. What can we do about inputs into agriculture? What can we do about, production, farming, and all of that, mechanized agriculture? What can we do about processing? What can we do about storage of agriculture so that we don't have huge post-harvest losses? What can we do about irrigation so that we have all year-round farming rather than waiting for rainy season before we can farm? What can we do about packaging? What can we do about marketing? So it's a whole range of issues in that agri value chain. And it has the prospect of creating, apart from providing food, has the prospect of generating a whole lot of employment. That is one. On transportation, there has to be massive investments in mass transit in the immediate to short term. But long term, we need to see more rail services all over the world, especially where you have this kind of population. They use a lot of rail. Railway system works. It moves goods, it moves people across everywhere. That is the way it is in many other countries, especially where you have this kind of population. So you cannot overinvest in the transportation infrastructure. And again, in order to encourage investors, we can look at the tariffs. All these buses that are not produced locally, what is the import duty we are charging on them? We can slash them by 50% or scrap them completely. These are some quick wins that you can deploy. And of course, just as I said, we can do a lot more with renewables so that less people will be relying on this either generator or even the so-called national grid. It is very cheap for me to install solar on my roof. It's very cheap for me to buy the inverters and the batteries. Why will I worry about whether one disco is performing or the other?
All right.
So we can make those things more accessible through policy. And we should also need to deal with inflation. That's a macroeconomic issue. There's a supply side factor to inflation, but there's also a macroeconomic management side dimension to inflation. We have to reduce the rate at which the CBN is funding the deficit. Credit to government by the banking system as of February was about 28 trillion naira. Those things have significant effects for inflation. So when we talk about inflation, we are just talking about diesel and all of that. We are not talking about the monetary effect on liquidity, which is driving inflation. So we need to keep a tap on that. The CBN cannot just be throwing money into the system the way it has been throwing money. Those things have very serious inflationary effect.
All right. So, Dr. Yusuf, government spoke recently about $800 million facility if and when fuel subsidy is removed. Do you think this facility is necessary?
Well, first of all, the whole concept of subsidy removal is to make savings, among other things. Now, when you are making savings, why will you go and borrow again? We are talking that altogether, in a year, we are spending about 7 trillion naira. If we're able to make even half of that as gain, why will you need to go and borrow money to be able to provide palliatives? So I don't understand the logic.
So this is quite unnecessary.
I don't understand the logic. Now, we have had this subsidy thing in the past. We had the Petroleum Trust Fund. It was a product of subsidy removal at that time. And the funding of the Petroleum Trust Fund was from the savings from the removal of subsidy at that time. We had SureP under Jonathan. The funding for SureP was from the savings from the subsidy removal. So why must you go and borrow, especially now that our debt thing is overflowing? Why must you go and borrow again for that? I don't understand the logic. And in any case, whatever we are doing around palliatives should be managed by the incoming administration. Yes, maybe they have been able to secure the loan, but anything about disbursement, register, all these things they are talking about, all those should be put on hold. Let the incoming administration come with its own framework as to how to deal with this matter.
All right. So let's get practical now. Dr. Yusuf, do you think an average Nigerian can survive a situation where he or she has to buy petrol for as high as 800 naira per liter?
No, certainly not.
Okay.
Certainly not. And that is why I was talking about phased removal. Even right now, it may not have been pronounced as a policy. You don't buy petroleum products at the same price across the country.
Yeah, that's it.
Even in Lagos here, some are selling at 184, some are selling at 200, some are selling at 220, and the farther away from Lagos, the higher those prices. So already, the market mechanism is already creeping in, even before the formal announcement of this deregulation. But to come to your point, the shock will be too much. So that's why I was saying that this thing has to be faced. And as we are facing it, we need to complement it with things that will ease the burden on citizens, some of which I've mentioned earlier.
Absolutely.
So that is the way I think it should be handled.
All right, so let's talk about more angles to this particular issue. The National Economic Council has targeted $2.5 billion revenue from non-oil sector. How feasible is this?
$2.4 billion.
$2.5 billion.
Revenue.
Yes, from non-oil sector.
Well, I think it is feasible. I don't have the data right now. I think it's feasible because when you look at how much we are getting from oil, I mean, you're talking about maybe close to 40, 50 billion, annually. So we are talking about 2.5. I don't think that is much. Even diaspora remittances. Diaspora remittances for many years has been over 20 billion US dollars. So if we are talking about 2.5, I don't think that is too much to achieve. But more importantly, is to build the capacity of this economy to be more productive. To be more productive to ensure import substitution. So that most of the things we are importing, we will not be importing them again. So that will go a long way. And to also ensure productivity to be able to diversify the economy. We have more reserves in gas than in crude oil. Look at what all the countries that have gas, they are smiling now because of all this problem of Russia and Ukraine. And you have huge reserves of gas here. What are we doing to unlock the potentials for investment in that space? These are quick wins. These are things that can make us leapfrog easily. You know how many billions of dollars you make if you really create the environment for people to invest in gas? These are things that are available, hot demand all over the world. Even though we talk about decarbonization and all of that, but even many of these countries are beginning now to even recognize gas as a transition fuel.
So
there's a whole lot of potential. It is good to talk about non-oil, but we need to optimize opportunities even in the oil and gas area, which we are not doing enough of. There's a lot to be done in that space.
So talking about unlocking potentials, what measures do you think the next president should use to diversify the economy for increased revenue?
Well, there are quite a number of things. First, we are losing a lot of revenue from oil to oil theft. And unfortunately, that has been with us for some years. Lately, the current administration has woken up and has taken some steps. But even then, we are still struggling to meet our OPEC quota. That's a huge loss of revenue. It's a huge loss of foreign exchange. So how the political will to deal with that problem, that will help to unlock quite a lot of revenue. We have discussed the issue of subsidy. Even though it's a contentious issue, if we're able to progress with it, you should be able to unlock close to 7 trillion naira in revenue.
That's a lot of money.
Then we have another worrisome subsidy, which is foreign exchange subsidy. Now, annually, the central bank says between $20 to $22 billion in the official foreign exchange market. The official rate, at least according to what's on the CBN website, is about 461, 462. The market rate is over 700. So even if we take the $20 billion and take it to the market at 600, we'll be making close to 200 naira extra on a dollar. And if you look at that properly, you should be unlocking revenue of between 3 to 4 trillion naira from it. Because the economic players today are buying forex at most of them over 700. So the arbitrage between are being enjoyed by some people within the economy. That's a huge rent. That we have created a huge rent opportunity, which we need to do away with. And if we do away with that, we'll be locking revenue minimum of 3 trillion naira annually, minimum. Then, if you build the economy well, there is a strong correlation between economic growth and revenue growth. So if you deal with all the variables affecting investment, we are talking about macroeconomic environment, we are talking about inflation, we are talking about foreign exchange stability and credibility of the process, we are talking about insecurity, we are talking about the regulatory environment, we are talking about the challenges at the ports, we are talking about bureaucracy as they relate to government and to businesses. If we're able to remove those barriers, the economy will grow much better. There'll be more investment. If you have more investment in an economy, certainly revenue will grow with it. There's a strong correlation between revenue growth, investment growth, and GDP growth. So growth is also very important. Not just to generate revenue, but even to also create jobs. Then we need to reform our budget process.
All right.
Because the budget itself, a lot of issues we have heard about the budget. Budget padding, duplication of projects, all sorts of issues. So you have a process to do a proper audit of the budgetary process and to clean it up so that all these wastages will be stopped. Right, then we need to cut down the cost of governance. Because fiscal sustainability is not only about revenue. It's only about how are we managing costs. Those things have to go together to ensure the sustainability of the fiscal space.
All right. Sadly, we may not be able to unpack all of the angles connected to this discussion because of time. But then, before we go then, how can Nigeria attract foreign debts? How can Nigeria attract foreign direct investments to stimulate economic growth and reduce debt burden?
You see, when we talk about investment, foreign investment is as important as local investment.
Okay.
In fact, local investment are giving us more jobs than foreign investments. And what is good for the foreign investor is good for the local investors. So we have to deal with issues of investment environment generally. And that will entail some of the reforms that I've talked about. And one major obstacle to foreign investment today is our foreign exchange policy. And this must be one of the quick things that the new administration has to tackle. And happily, it's in the manifesto of the APC. The current foreign exchange policy cannot continue if you want to make progress in this economy. You cannot have an economy where some people are getting foreign exchange at 461, others are getting it at 740, 750.
All right.
An economy cannot progress that way. And investors will not come. So we need to remove policy barriers. We need to remove regulatory barriers. We need to deal with issues of insecurity and the perception that is creating for the economy and for the country. We need to inspire confidence in investors.
Dr. Yusuf,
and we need to ensure level playing field
Dr. Yusuf, you would
for
agree
all
with me
for
that,
all investors.
This is a discussion that cannot be overemphasized, especially
it
as a new government is set to be inaugurated. But I must say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Muda Yusuf. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. Thank you very much,
Thank
sir,
you,
for finding
Jumake.
time
Thank
to be
you.
on
It's a
the program
pleasure.
this
Thank
morning.
you.